Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to introduce you to Lisa Pillemer. Lisa's family have been members of the Great for many years, and I have an association with Lisa from when she worked at BJE, and I have always admired her enthusiasm and her commitment. Lisa and her husband lived in New York for a few years, where she taught, and they are now happily back in Sydney, and we are delighted. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Can you all hear me? I hope okay now. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to present to you this morning. Thank you to Sharon too. Both of you have been working so hard to bring to life this wonderful online experience for our community and keep us all connected in these surreal times. And I'm so appreciative to be a part of it. So thank you for inviting me. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and names and also see some new ones too. So before I begin, I want to encourage you all to put on your videos so we can see your lovely faces. I am hoping that this session will be an interactive one. So I'm going to encourage you to write your responses, your questions, your comments into the chat box, which I hope you can see down the bottom of your screen. Or just feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me. And if you have a comment or a question, that's fine too. Lynn and Sharon will help sort of facilitate that. And also towards the end, we'll have some time just for a casual Q&A and discussion. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm streaming from the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I recognize this land for tens of thousands of years has held the stories of their language and their culture. We extend our respect to Indigenous leaders, elders, past, present, and emerging, and recognize the privilege in being able to meet and online here freely this morning. All right, so just a little bit about me so you know where I'm coming from with this presentation. I am an educator, I'm a teacher, and sort of over the past 10 or so years, I've been working mainly in schools, educational institutions, and non-for-profits, working mainly with youth and young adults. Last September, however, I had my second child, a daughter, and so at the moment I'm currently on maternity leave. So as where many of my friends right now during the sort of COVID lockdown isolation period are sort of overwhelmed, juggling kids, juggling work, they're at home. I've actually found myself with some spare time and have sort of been allowed to be forced to stop and reflect, sort of take stock of what's going on in the world and where I am. And what I found myself really reflecting a lot on was the act of giving, of Sadaqa and charity work. So for the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to see if my slideshow is going to work. Hold on 1 second. There we go. For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to define giving as time, care, resources, and funds we give freely to a person or an organization. Giving is central to Judaism. It is central to our identity as Jews. It informs our daily practice and in some ways gives many of us purpose on how to conduct our lives. Giving, Sadaqa, Chesed, it impacts every part of our lives. We see it in the way that we practice with and participate in our cultural events, our social events, the sport we participate in, the care that we give to our children, the museums that we might visit, feeding the vulnerable, taking care of our elderly. All aspects of our life or areas in our weekly, daily interaction, activities we enjoy, participate in, they all benefit from the giving we give to it. And so many of us, when COVID-19 began to emerge around the world, and particularly in Australia, we found ourselves in unprecedented times. And in a very short amount of time, we have seen tremendous, enormous financial and social changes. And these changes, no matter who you are, where you've come from, they've affected all of us. They're inescapable. Some of this has affected we've been worstly affected than others, but no matter what, we are all facing a very different financial environment that we were in 3 or 4 months ago. Many of us do not have the capacity to give as much or even at all. And many of us are even thinking about or questioning and stuck as the best ways to be giving our time or our resources now. And many charities have been doing amazing work during this pandemic. They've supported the government response both on a federal and local level. However, our future is far from secure and certain, and some very good charities will not, may not, survive this pandemic. And as I said, giving is embedded into who we are, how we see ourselves, how we conduct our lives, and much of the activity and participation that we do in and we participate in is very much inspired from our Jewish tradition and our Jewish scriptures. Okay, so what are we going to be looking at during this sort of 25, 35-minute presentation? So the first part, we're going to look at we're going to quickly go through some of our Jewish sort of scriptures and see what our Jewish tradition tells us, informs us about giving. Then I want us to look at a few some of the Jewish responses to Covid-19 that have happened sort of on an international level, but also on a very local level in our local community too. And then I'm going to get you guys to be a bit interactive. And I want us to start thinking about how does our Jewish tradition inspire us to give, and what Jewish values influence your giving. So get ready to participate in that section. And then lastly, we're going to look at an amazing resource from an organization called Amplifier. And I'll talk a bit more about Amplifier when we get to that. And they've come up with a resource to think about how do we know how to direct our resources in this age of COVID-19. And then towards the end, I'm going to leave with less time for a discussion and an informal Q&A part too. All right. All right, cool. So when I was doing this research for this presentation, I came across this poem that it just really spoke to me, and I thought it really gave me the essence of what giving is for me. So I'm going to ask Sharon to read it out for me so you guys don't have to listen to my voice for the next 30 minutes. You can hear someone else's voice for a bit. And while Sharon is reading out the poem, I want you to read along with her, but I also want you, I'm going to give you a few moments at the end once she's read it, is to also comment in the chat box and write what it stands out to you about giving in this poem. Okay? So Sharon, if you want to unmute yourself, read the poem for us, that would be great.
One river gives its journey to the next. We give because someone gave to us. We give because nobody gave to us. We give because giving has changed us. We give because giving could have changed us. We have been better for it. We have been wounded by it. Giving has many faces. It is loud and quiet, big though small, diamond in wood nails. Its story is old, the plot worn, and the pages too. But we read this book anyway over and over again. Giving is first and every time, hand to hand, mine to yours, yours to mine. You gave me blue and I gave you yellow. Together we are simple green. You gave me what you did not have, and I gave you what I had to give. Together we made something greater from the difference.
Thanks, Sharon. So I'm just going to give you a few moments. If you could just type some responses into the chat box, that would be great. Just what stands out in this poem about giving to you. Sharon or Lynn, oh, here, I've got my chat box. Thank you.
I can read to you. That giving benefits the giver as well as the receiver, from Sharon.
Anyone else brave enough to write something? Okay, here we go. Thanks, Caroline.
Can everyone see that, or do we need to read it out? I think everyone can see.
Okay, great.
Read it out, Lynn, I think.
Okay. From Caroline, I always feel by giving to others, you get so much more back. So in reality, it's not a purely selfless act. It benefits us all.
Right. So I feel like from some of the conversations I've had that many of us feel quite stuck about the best ways to give. So we're going to look at some of the text just quickly in Judaism, and then we're going to start thinking about and exploring different ways that we as individuals can be giving during this time. Okay, so you should all be familiar with this story. And we find acts of loving kindness are central to Judaism. We find these acts throughout our sacred texts, throughout the Torah, throughout the Tanakh. And so this is the story of when Abraham sends Eliezer, his servant, out to find a suitable wife for his son, Yitzhak. And so this is Rebecca, and she is drawing water, not only to give to Eliezer, but also to give to the camels. And Eliezer was really struck by this, that, wow, here is a woman that she's not only thinking about me as a human, but she's also thinking about the thirst of my animals and the well-being of my animals. And he says that is a sign that this woman is, she can come with me and she can enter the house of Abraham. And we have our ancestry from her. Okay. This is a saying, a short verse from Parashat Shoftim. Tzedek, tzedek tirdaf. Justice, justice shall you pursue. And this is really from when the Torah is creating the judicial system. And the rabbis explain that tzedek, tzedek tirdaf, tzedek, tzedek tirdaf, justice, justice shall you pursue, is emphasizing that all of us, no matter who we are, we shall pursue a life of righteousness and justice. We must have the courage, no matter who we are, where we come from, to stand up and speak out for the betterment of society. And this we're all familiar with as well. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And the Talmud defines this as sort of the greatest principle of Judaism, love thy neighbor as thyself. I could have chosen many images from the internet from this one, but this seems fitting at the moment as well. These are just examples within our sacred text where we see our tradition emphasizing the needs for us to act with kindness, justice, righteousness, and chesed. You can see that this concept is central in our Judaism, in our tradition. So, what are some of the responses been to the pandemic? What are some of the Jewish responses been to the pandemic? And some of these are, really grand, bold responses, and some of them are, much more modest, where people have thought really creatively about small acts that they can do. So I'll start off with something that's really, I find very inspiring and quite, a grand, bold statement and a response, and that is of Natan Sharansky. I'm sure many of you know who Sharansky is. He spent 9 years of his life in Soviet prisons. He was central to the struggle of Soviet Jewry to earn their freedom and to immigrate to Israel. He's a human rights activist. He was previously, for many years, the chairman of the Jewish Agency. And this year, he was the winner of the Genesis Prize. For many of you who don't know, Genesis Prize is kind of like the Nobel Peace Prize for Judaism, Jewish world around the world. And he decided to $1 million prize award, and he donated the entire amount to causes dealing with the pandemic. Okay. This is a really beautiful story. This is two brothers, Matthew and Jeremy Jason, and they've created a project called Kippahs to the Rescue. And they are from Houston, and I think this story is really incredible. And it goes to very much the core of who we are as Jews. So these are teenage boys, and just a bit of background, every Friday they would volunteer at like a homeless shelter, at a soup kitchen, feeding the homeless in their neighborhood in Houston, and people who cannot afford food, obviously. And so one Friday during the pandemic, early on in the pandemic, they came home, and obviously that Friday night is Shabbat dinner, and they were discussing how the new US guidelines to wear face masks. And over Shabbat dinner, they realized, the people that they were serving that day, how are they going to get face masks? How are they going to afford it? Where would they obtain them from? And they came up with this idea that they were going to get people in their community to donate kippot, and they were going to turn them into face masks. And I think from up to date, the last thing that I read, which is obviously from a few weeks ago though now, but they'd already donated 500 kippot to homeless people in their community. And so I've left and I'll somehow put it into the chat box for you, this link at the bottom of this image, and it's the boys speaking about their project. And, you know, just, it shows also one, your pure innocence of, you know, young teenage boys, but also what you can do no matter who you are, to sort of give back and think about creatively how you can give back to your community and support your local community during these times. Okay, and another sort of basic thing that I remember early on, my friend and I, this has got to be early March, second or third week of March, she called me and she said, what could I do? How do I volunteer? I said, you can't volunteer. We're in isolation, we're in lockdown, you can't go out. And she was like, but I want to do something. I want to go shopping for people. There's elderly people stuck at home. What do I do? So she came up with this idea that she was just she knew there was some elderly people on her street, and she went and knocked on their doors. And she said, give me your number. Here's my number. I'm going to call you every day to make sure you're okay. And then once a week, she just went and did their shopping for them too. And then she kind of just started calling lots of us and said, I've got elderly people to connect you with. And so she just gave out everyone's numbers, and all of a sudden we all have like these connections with these elderly people, whether they're in our neighborhood or not. But it's just a way to connect people and to keep people not feeling like they're stuck at home, but there are people caring for them, thinking about them, and making sure that they feel okay and they don't feel isolated. Again, another very sort of small, modest task that we could do in these times. Okay, another sort of local I'm going to get more local Jewish responses in Sydney now. I'm not sure if any of you have heard about this. This has kind of just been launched about 2 weeks ago, called Junera, and it's started by a gentleman called Danny Grinberg. Some of you might remember Danny Grinberg was the former CEO of JCA a couple of years ago. Danny called me about 6 weeks ago and he said, I don't know what to do. My elderly parents are stuck at home and I keep telling them that there's all these amazing things going on in the community, but they can't keep up with it all. And I don't know what to do. What should I do? How do I inform them? How do I engage them? How do I get them sure that they're not missing out on all these amazing things to keep them connected? And so he partnered with some really smart people, and within sort of a month, he was able to get this website up and running. And if you log on it, you can see every single event basically happening not only in our Sydney Jewish community, but also in the Australian Jewish community, and also internationally, globally. And it's very much focused on Jewish events that are happening online on a daily and weekly basis. And you can see sort of, I've kind of just done a screenshot of the home screen here that, you know, if you're interested in food, entertainment, music, whatever it might be, you can pick out what you like and sort of see what's going on. And some of them obviously for free, some of them you have to sign up, have to pay a small amount. But yeah, that's also an amazing resource for people. And I'll put that into the chat box so you can also just click on it and have a look what's going on. And that's just been up, you know, being up to date on a daily basis. Okay, another wonderful organisation in our community is the Sydney Friendship Circle. The Sydney Friendship Circle helps people living with a disability. They create inclusive programs so that people with disabilities can create friendships and long-lasting friendships and memorable experiences. Most of their programs are online, face-to-face. On the weekends, they run camps. And so they were stuck, you know, they had all these huge amounts of volunteers, mainly teenagers, willing to help out, who go in the afternoons, volunteer on the weekend, volunteer during the school holidays at camps for them, but their programs couldn't run. But there were still these children with disabilities at home stuck with their parents. And so they quickly pivoted and they've created an amazing online program where they have all their volunteers sort of saying, I love to make pizza. And if you see on the screen, you can see on a Friday at 1:30, Thursday at 1:30, they're going to be doing pizza making with Romy. And these are all teenagers who have decided that, you know, they've looked at their strengths and said, this is what I can offer my friends or my connections, people with, you know, families with kids with disabilities, and I can run something for them, you know, during the day at this time. And you can see it's really, you know, incredible to see the program they were able to put together in a very short amount of time. And you can see this is week 6. So this had already been going on for 6 weeks when I screenshotted this. Okay, and now, you know, on a larger sort of, it's also Sydney, but also thinking about our community on a larger scale, just the quick response from the JCA and the Board of Deputies, to create a COVID-19, our Jewish Emergency Response Fund. And if you've read some of the stories that have been sort of sent around by some of the emails, you can see sort of the care that our community has been given to, families and people in dire straits, and what we've been able to do in such a short amount of time. And I feel very blessed to be part of such a sort of special community that has just responded in such an amazing, caring way in this time of crisis. And very much giving to its sort of the central nature to our community. Okay. I'll just read you this last quote. In an emergency, the responsibility to sustain the poor rests on the individual. Over time, the responsibility shifts to the rest of the community. And I hope those examples were able to sort of see that quote come to life. Okay, so now it's time for you guys to start thinking about your own giving and how you might feel inspired to give, and to think about, certain charities that you might want to support. Knowing that, not every charities, some charities may survive this pandemic, many charities will not survive this pandemic. So as this question that I posed to you, right? While we can't change the current state of the world, we can decide how to respond to it. And I want you to consider which Jewish values are most important to you. And as you consider that, I want you to think about what would happen, let's say that tomorrow, right, the charity that you've always supported ceased to exist. What would happen? What would happen to the people that charity serves? Okay, I want you to think about sort of the survival of the organization, institution that you've supported, and thinking about what would happen if that ceased to exist. And begin to think about which Jewish values are most important to you and how you'd like to continue giving during these times. So I'm going to encourage you again all to write into the chat box some Jewish values that are central to you when you think about giving. Okay, I've come up with a few myself, so I'll just post some. Is it acts of loving kindness? Is it saving a Jewish life, pikuah nefesh? Is it feeding and sheltering the vulnerable? Looking after our elderly population? There are plenty more, but these are just 4 that I've been thinking about. Something else that I think it's interesting to think about is that COVID-19 has also transformed people to focus more on local populations, local communities, rather than charities with a universal footprint. So for example, an organization or a charity like Oz Harvest and RSPCA, their donations and their charitable givings they've never seen something higher before. And they are getting more and more during this time. We're more sort of you think about World Vision, it's got more of an international global footprint. Their charitable donations have really decreased in size. Okay, something else to think about when you want to support and when you want to continue giving in these times of need. Okay, just gonna. So I really encourage you all to use these values to help make informed decisions about your giving. Okay. So Amplifier is an amazing resource that I've used, and I have been to, and I've gone to some of their workshops when I lived in New York. And Amplifier is an organization based in America, based in New York, and they're really set up to help people, individuals, no matter, you know, large foundations, no matter how sort of, you know, where you sit, to think about their capacity to give, and help people make informed decisions about their giving. And I can put their website into many, they've got fantastic resources as well to have a look at. And so this is something that they have put together in response to COVID-19 and people's capacity to give. And they're encouraging people to think about to ask themselves, materially, do I and those I support and love have what they need right now? Do I have a safety net to fall back on that will provide food, housing, support if I or others in my family lose my or our income? What about my income? Is it stable? Is it likely to remain so? And lastly, am I saving right now? Okay, important questions to think about at the moment. Another question they've posed, something for us to think about, sorry, my chat box is just doing funny things, is when considering my values and who I want myself and the world to be after the crisis, how will I donate during the crisis? I think that is something really important for us to pause on, to think about, and to reflect upon as we consider our capacity to give. And another amazing resource that they put together, which I will find the link for this diagram for you. And I think it's sort of a lovely flowchart for you to walk yourself through. When you think about giving, is will I donate to organizations addressing the crisis or to other organizations I care about to ensure they make it through the crisis? And as you go through this flowchart, it will really help you sort of solidify those questions that I've been asking you about how you want to give, where you want to give, whether it's time, resources, funds, to different or various charities that are suffering during this pandemic. So I'll somehow give this to Lynn, and maybe she can send it out to you all after the webinar. So let's pause for a moment for you to take yourself through that flow chart. Okay, and so now I'm just going to open it up to sort of general thoughts, questions, and answers and Q&A that might have raised for you over this presentation. Lynn or Sharon, can you see the chat box? I can't get to it.
Yes, okay, so
thank you.
I can read to you.
Thanks.
So Tessa has written, I think now more than ever it is a time to be aware of what people who are disadvantaged are going through. I think about people who don't have access to running water, power, food, people who have lost jobs. And then I've written that I think we are a community that looks after each other, and we always find a way to do so. And I've been inspired by how not only our community, but how people and groups of people around the world have come together to support one another. And I found that there's so much, and there are so many people doing such wonderful things. And I think to zone in on something that resonates with you is probably key, because one can only give so much to one thing at a time. You know, it's not easy to spread yourself thin. My take on it.
One of the things that I think has made it even harder this time here in Australia particularly is that we had the fires so recently, and so many people were giving so much to that, and now you know, and now you know we need to give more. It's huge demands on people's pockets, but one right on top of the other. It's an unprecedented time.
Very true. And you know, that's what I said at the beginning, that this financial and sort of social environment, this, you know, we've seen huge changes in such a short amount of time, and we don't know what still is to come. Just to begin to think about, right, what does tomorrow look like if my charity does cease to exist, and what will happen to the people that it serves?
Do you know, Lisa, of any charities currently that are ceasing to exist or may soon cease to exist?
I don't know of any at the moment, but I do know that many of them are, you know, going through hard times, and they will have to begin to think about, you know, their programs, what they offer, what they do offer, and what they do not offer, you know. And we're not talking about, you know, for the next 6 months, we're talking about for the next 3 to 5 years, right? This is going to be an effect on, you know, institutions, you know, for, you know, not just, you know, the next 6 years. Not the immediate future, but long-term too.
And there's more than just financial support.
Yes.
You know, there's
the huge amounts of volunteers as well.
There's financial support, there's emotional, there's health, there's all sorts of support that people are needing at this time. And as you say, will need for a while. Because we live in a time that is unprecedented, and there's no blueprint for how to manage these times.
Yes. That's very, yeah.
Anyone else?
Lauren, maybe unmute everybody and then people can chime in.
Okay. Well, can I talk, Jules?
Yes, Jill, of course.
I'm just going to say, as you get older, one of the concerns for people is how are you going to organise your life so that you're never ever dependent on your children when you're working out how much you can afford to give. That is so difficult to work out. And the other thing that I'm aware of is, particularly with some of the charities in this city, is that they pay so much of what you give goes towards people who are involved in the organisation. Not all of the work is done voluntarily, and I think that's something that one has to take into account, and that often I don't approve of from time to time. Anyway, but the main comment I wanted to make is that it's really difficult as you get older to know how much is fair, to how much you can afford to give and also make sure that you remain independent.
Yeah.
Another thing is, as we're considered seniors now, we have to stop doing like Meals on Wheels, and I'm finding that this is very frustrating. I feel like I'd like to start, but I don't know when we'll be allowed to be able to do that again, you know, because my daughters are scared for me to do these things, and so I don't know. But I miss helping out, and this is a way that I've been able to help in the community.
Yeah, no, I appreciate, you know, sort of everyone, our hat should go off to the volunteers that make things happen for like Meals on Wheels. And yes, you know, have face-to-face interactions and face-to-face contact, you know, is something that we need to think about, and charities will need to think about how to move forward with that. And I don't think anyone has the answer at the moment.
No.
Lisa, there's another comment here where someone has said finances are needed, but also time. Zoom has been wonderful for seniors in lockdown whose social circumstances and needs continue after lockdown ends, as do health issues. They also continue. I think that the Zoom sessions that certainly that we at Great Women have created, and as others, have really been a great lifeline to people.
I highly encourage you to go look at the Do Neuro website that I had on earlier. Just go back to it if I can find it. There it is, doneuro.org.au. You all have a look at it. And I've been most impressed, just flicking around a few times in there about what they're showing and what they're, it's basically telling you, people who are stuck at home, who are isolated, they're still saying people who are over 70, they want you to stay at home. They don't want you to be going out. This platform was really made, right, with those types of people in mind. Danny Grimberg, his parents are in their 70s and 80s. And, that's what his concern was. How do I get my parents to continue to be engaged and involved in our community? And so that's what this website was made. And even, me in my early 30s, it's been fantastic and wonderful for me to even go there and see what the community is also offering. So, yeah.
A few more messages there in the
I think there's somewhere somewhere where it says there's some law somewhere where it says how much Jewish people should give to charity, not more than 10% or something.
Yeah, you're right.
Where's that?
Mm-hmm. The rabbi on?
Mm-hmm.
No.
That's a question for the rabbi. But yeah, that is.
Somewhere I often have quoted to me that Jewish people, yes.
Yes, that we should be giving if we can 10% of what we get.
Quite a lot, isn't it?
But that is still quite a lot. I agree. Yeah. I also just want to go back to your point. I think it was, sorry, your name has stopped from my screen. The lady that just spoke. I'm sorry.
Jill.
About thinking about, when you do give your $50, about where it is going and how you don't want it just to be going to some administrative cost as well. Even though, those overheads are important and they're needed for a charity or an institution to run, but to also think about, your thoughtfulness of giving and where your charity or where your sum is being directed towards. And asking, the institution that you choose to support, saying, this is what I have to give, and I want to direct it towards this cause or to this program, or to, whatever it might be, and talking to them about it, where it is going, and asking them for the impact or the objectives that they might have for that money, and then asking for a report after, how did it impact a person or a group of people, and seeing then the impact of your support, I think, is also very important, and knowing that it's not just necessarily going to some overhead cost that you get frustrated with about.
One of the things I was thinking of, I'm not quite sure how this is going to come out right, is it's so hard these days for young people to save. What really would be the ideal would be for everybody to have a little nest egg of, say, 3 or 4 or 5 months worth of savings, so that when something like this happens, people have got something to fall back on. But particularly, here in Australia, things are so expensive and rents are expensive, and if your kids are at private Jewish day schools, everything's expensive, and it's hard for people to save, to have that nest egg to fall back on, let alone give to charity. And I'm just thinking, if there were financial advisors who could donate their time by advising particularly the younger generation in how to manage themselves and their funds so that they can put some away for giving and put some away for themselves. You know what they say, charity begins at home. You need to have enough for yourself that you don't want to, as Jill said, you don't want to have to fall back on others later. That was a bit garbled, but
it's a wonderful idea and something that I've been thinking about a lot, actually. So it's an interesting point that you've raised. And I'd love to talk to you more about it. But yeah, it's something that I actually have been thinking about a lot. And, you know, we talked about how giving is so central to who we are and our identity. And, you know, and you know, our texts say that, you know, giving is not necessarily for the person that's receiving the funds, but it's very much also about the person who is giving it. And what it does for you and how you feel. And, you know, I've had students talk to me about charity and Sadaqa is such a selfish act. You know, it's not necessarily about the person who's giving it. It's about how it makes you feel. And I'm like, I agree with you, right? It's not necessarily all the time about the receiver, but it is also about the giver and how it makes you feel, knowing that you are doing something to better the world. The concept of tikkun olam, fixing the world, repairing the world, that we are taking our part in it. And by doing, we're taking our part in it by, you know, giving over our time, our funds, our resources, no matter what that is. So yeah, you know, for young people to take part in that, and to make themselves feel good and know that that's central to who they are, it's something that needs to be planned, thoughtful, and it's a responsible act as well. So yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot, Sharon. So I'm happy to talk further about it with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been a wake-up call to a lot of people who, you know, just thought that, you know, your life would go on. And all of a sudden we've had these two major events in our community within the last 6 months. Not everybody had thought of or was able to plan for it.
And, you know, it's interesting that that organization I mentioned earlier, Amplifier, you know, in the States, they run these unbelievable programs where they get grandparent and grandkid together. And grandparent and grandkid come together, you know, just once off and talk about, you know, the importance of giving. And for grandparent and grandkid to decide together, where should we give and how should we give, and what's important to you might not be important to me, but as a sort of a unit, right, them deciding together, I want my, you know, by $5 a month that I get from my mum and dad, and I want half of that to be put aside so I can give to that, you know, to that charity or to that program that I find is important to my identity, whether it's like, you know, kids giving, you know, to another kid that can't afford a skateboard, whatever it might be. But sort of intrinsically trying to, you know, entrench that value of giving in a very young age, and having that sort of that generational connection to talk about why it's so important to who you are, and sort of embed that as a sort of a lifelong sort of behavior.
And there are organizations like, there's an organization in Sydney called Kids Giving Back.
Yeah.
Where they encourage children, but I think that when it's cemented in the home and it comes from it probably has more long-term impression than participating as a group because you're doing it through your school or something like that. But I mean, I think those things are fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody's made the comment here, Anne, on the chat. It's impossible to have months worth of nest egg on a pension. So I have to be very careful in my tzedakah and mainly give to Jewish organizations. That was exactly my point, how hard it is to save for a nest egg when what your income is, you know, covers your daily needs and not much more. But yet there are people like Anne who, despite that, is still giving tzedakah.
Yeah. We need more people like you, Anne.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Do we have any more questions?
Lisa, if I could just say, I think that this COVID pandemic has just highlighted how unequal we are really in the world. I think some of the very fortunate countries like Australia and even the US that have have the infrastructure to help people, and even then people are really insecure. But it just highlights how third world countries are surviving at a level. For me, it actually brought home South Africa, really, where they, a lot of people weren't able to social distance, didn't have access to water, electricity, warmth. And I think that some of the programs, recently they had the South African Film Festival, and that money went to Education Without Borders. But I do think that there are programs that sort of reach across globally to help other countries that are facing, crises like this at a very basic level of survival, where people are sort of worried about day to day. And I think that for me brought home, because South Africa, for example, is one country where I know that I was able to give $200, which actually has an exchange rate of to the value of 2,000 Rand, which will actually help a person. You can actually feed a person in South Africa for $45 a week, 45 Rand a week. So by helping a family with 2,000 Rand, which is $200 for us, you actually really, that goes a long way. So for me, that actually is really, the regular charities that I support are very important and fundamental at this time. But I think globally with this crisis, I think people, are facing survival at a different level. So for me, it just brought up a lot of issues, how these people are trying to survive and how I can actually extend my giving in a different kind of way.
Yeah. It's an interesting comment, because, at first people were talking about and discussing, the many comments were that no matter who you are, where you come from, this pandemic will hit you. It's not just hitting the rich or the poor or, wherever you live. That's true. It does affect you as a human the same way as it affects anyone as a human. But of your country's response and how you live and where you live, there's definitely been very much an unequal footprint. And it's been devastating to see some images from the developing countries, especially countries in Africa, countries like, India and South America, some of the South American countries too. Some of those images have been shocking to watch.
Anne has asked if there's she says there are always people worse off than ourselves. Is there a Jewish organization here who look after the homeless? I think Port Charity is a wonderful kindness.
Yeah, isn't that a brilliant idea by those young boys? I was, loved it. So I know that Jewish Care are doing a lot, and also Jewish House is a Jewish organization, but they cater for homeless, no matter who you are, where you come from, no matter what your religion is, in the eastern suburbs. So yeah, Jewish Care and Jewish House. Would that be right, Lynn?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think Jewish Care only looks after Jewish people, doesn't it?
Yeah, Jewish Care, that's true.
Sorry, Jill, could you talk a little louder? I can't.
What I said was that Jewish Care, I think only looks after Jewish people.
I think so.
But I've just forgotten for a moment. But the other charity that the one that you mentioned, of course, looks after many people who are not Jewish.
Correct.
As well as Jewish.
Yes.
As well as if
Yeah.
people have Jewish.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Do we have any more questions?
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. It's been most wonderful, almost hour, and you have inspired us and given us all food for thought and so many wonderful resources that I think we'll all be looking forward to looking into. And they will be available. We will share them with whoever wishes.
Thank you, Caroline. Caroline's just written about.
Yes, about Alethea. Yes, yes, yes. So thank you so much.
It's absolutely wonderful, Lisa. Thank you for your time and so much effort into putting together this talk. Your slides are beautiful. But your thoughts behind them are even more beautiful. And really, we really appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for including me, and thank you for putting such a wonderful program for us all.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us today.